We still have some snow left here in northern Maine, even though it's towards the end of April, but at least it's finally melting. And of course, that means that the rivers are flooding. I love this time of year because I can come out here to the river in the morning, think about life, and help to reconnect myself with nature, which is actually reconnecting myself with myself, because you know that nature is a part of our greater self. The world is a part of our greater self. And it's good to be able to come outside and sit by the river like this. But one of the things I was thinking about this morning as I sat out by the Molunkus River, which is right across the street from Plum Gables, I was thinking about how the analogy that we've heard about how each person in the world is like a drop of water, and the drop of water thinks of itself as separate from all the other drops until it ends up in the middle of a river or an ocean or a lake or stream or pond and finds out that it's much more than the drop it thought it was. And I know you've probably heard that analogy many times, but it's good to come out to a place in nature and actually think about that, because it helps you to think about the higher realities of your own self. But one thing that I was thinking when I was sitting out here a few minutes ago is, if you watch that water flowing down the river, and it's really flowing now because of the melting ice, but if you watch that water flowing down the river, it's almost like comparable to the evolution of consciousness. You know, you have all these drops of water that have all mixed into one flowing mass, which is really what we all are, one flowing mass. And it's traveling down the river, going down a path, flowing, progressing, growing, till eventually it reaches the ocean. But in many ways, it's much like the evolution of consciousness. One thing I noticed as I was walking along the riverbank this morning is, if you watch these little parts along the edge of the river, if you watch how the water is flowing along the edge, oftentimes you'll see what looks like little whirlpools, and we call those eddies. Now the water in the middle is really rushing and progressing quite fast, but along the shores it's kind of like a safety net for the water. And you won't find just one or two eddies. If you watch leaves floating on top of the water, you'll see that eventually there comes a point in the river where these leaves stop flowing down and they just sit and spin in circles. It's like they're stuck. A part of that rushing fluid water somehow got stuck in itself, spinning around, no longer rushing, no longer progressing, just spinning in circles. That made me think of my own life. You probably wouldn't believe this, but I have been trapped in so many eddies in my life. And you know, the thing about eddies is that they feel like safe places, because you're no longer rushing on to the unknown. You feel like you have a containment of safety all around you. You feel like you understand, if not everything, at least you feel like you're in the perfect place where you have all the answers. And if you don't have all the answers, you know that they're in that perfect place where you're spinning around in. I think we all get trapped in eddies. When I was growing up, I was raised in a family where we were strict Latter-day Saints. You probably wouldn't have suspected that. But I grew up as a Mormon. Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I wasn't just a mediocre Mormon. And I think that's part of my problem. Because if I had just been a mediocre Mormon, I probably wouldn't have read so many books that the church had gone through the church correlation and said, these are our doctrines. I mean, I read them all. Mormon Doctrines of Bruce R. McConkie and Doctrines of Salvations, volumes 1 through 3, by the time I was 14. Because I figured if I'm going to be in some type of a religion and say this is what I believe, then I gotta really know what I believe. So that's what I did. I was trapped in that eddy for so many years. I even was one of those people that sometimes knock on people's door and say, I know the Book of Mormon is the Word of God. This was me when I was 19 and 20. I know Joseph Smith was a prophet. I know this church is the fullness of the gospel. And you know, I'm not ripping on any Mormons because I've been there. So I know what it is like to be trapped in an eddy. Sometimes it feels wonderful. It feels so safe. If you don't think you have all the answers, at least you know the answers are right there in your eddy. But are they? I found out they weren't. And you know what? I'm not the only one, I think, that had to break out of his eddy. But breaking out of my eddy that I have been trapped in for, like 25 years of my life, it was scary. It was really scary. I'm going to digress for a minute and share with you a little anecdote, something that happened to me in my past that I reflect on now, and I just can't believe what actually was transpiring. I was at the age of 19. I went to Provo, Utah, and I was going to serve as a missionary, because in the Mormon church, if you're 19 and you're an active Mormon and you come from a strong Latter-day Saint family, if you don't serve as a missionary, they sometimes really look down on you. Like, what are you doing wrong, And I wanted to please my parents. I wanted to please everyone in my circle. I wanted to feel right with God. So I did what I was raised to believe I should do. And I'm sitting there in Provo, Utah, at the Missionary Training Center, where all the Latter-day Saint missionaries go to get their little tags. And I was there for 2 months, getting trained on how to be a missionary. And one of the general authorities, actually it was one of the top 12 general authorities, an apostle of the church, was speaking to us, young men and women. And this guy said, I know that there are many of you out there that may not have a strong, firm testimony. This testimony is a belief that this is the absolute fullness of the gospel, that this is the true church upon the face of the earth, which is what the Mormon church calls itself, the fullness of the gospel, the true church. And he said, if you don't feel that way, it is okay. He said, this is what you need to do. Now get this. And see, to me it made perfect sense. And it works too. I have to tell you, this works. He said, if you don't believe that this is the true church, then what you need to do is you need to go and bear your testimony, which means tell everybody about how you believe this is the true church. You keep telling everyone that you know Joseph Smith was a prophet, that you know this is the fullness of the gospel and the true church. You got to go and tell everybody. Anytime you get up in front of people and you have a chance to bear your testimony, just say it. Say it out loud. And he said, and eventually you will have it. You will believe it and know it. Well, that works, because that's what I did. Later on in college, I studied psychology, and I also found out that's a technique of brainwashing. I was being brainwashed, and I didn't even know it. Oh, and incidentally, people who are brainwashed usually don't know they're getting brainwashed. They're the first ones to tell you they're not being brainwashed. But I was. I was brainwashed in so many ways. Now, this was not because they were trying to hurt me. They were trying to keep me in that eddy. And here I had read every book. I went down to the Institute of Religion's library for the Mormon church in my area. I would go in, I'd check out volumes of teachings of Spencer W. Kimball or whoever. Yeah, I checked these books out. I would read them and read them. I wanted to read more. But there were so many books that were not sanctified as by the church leadership that they said, don't go into those books, because you're going to find stuff out that's not true, and you don't want to expose yourself to those things. Well, finally I reached a point, though, where I was having some difficulties with a lot of the doctrines that I had been telling everyone I believed. For one thing, I stopped believing that God was outside of myself. I started to realize that if God is separate from the universe, then that would mean the universe is older than God? Well, where'd the universe come from? I mean, these are the kind of thoughts I thought.